yes, I'm seeing some nods. I got some thumbs up. That's great. My name is Steve Steiny. I'm with the National American Indian Alaska Native ATC. As Chevy mentioned, I want to thank Chevy for that wonderful introduction and reminding me of just how old I am. So thank you, Chevy, for that. Appreciate it. And I also want to thank Casey and Lindy and everyone at the Southern Tribal Health Board for inviting us into your summit. And I haven't had a chance to be part of the other meetings, but I'm thrilled to be here today and really honored to be co-presenting with my colleague and friend, Dr. Kathy Tomlin. So we have some wonderful, really wonderful information. For some of you, it may be review. For some of you, it may be some new information related to motivational interviewing. So I just have a couple of brief introductory slides. I'm going to do just a little bit about our center here at the University of Iowa at the College of Public Health. And then I'm going to take these slides down and Dr. Tomlin will put up our main slide deck for today. And I know we have a break, as Chevy mentioned, so we're going to try and do an hour and see if we can get as close to our goal for that first hour before you guys break, and then we'll pick it up when we get back. So looking forward to spending some time with all of you, and we really want to hear from you. And we're gonna do some practice exercises later in the day. So really, you're in for a real treat. Dr. Tomlin is just a gifted clinician, and I've learned a lot from her over the last 3 years as we work together. So happy to be here. Again, today, the title of today's presentation is called Building Culturally Informed Practices, excuse me, Motivational Interviewing Essentials. We are going to just scratch the surface on some fundamentals of MI and look at harm reduction and also cultural considerations as we look at the spirit of motivational interviewing. Some of you may know the HTC we are a national center, but we also share some of our services with 10 regional centers around the country, as well as a national Hispanic and Latinx HTC and an HTC network coordinating office at the University of Missouri. We as a center are funded through SAMHSA, and we always sort of note that the content of today's presentation is developed by the presenters, and the opinions expressed do not necessarily reflect the views or policies of SAMHSA, HHS, or the National American Indian Alaska Native HTC. And I know we're gathered here virtually today, but before we begin, we wanted to take a few moments to acknowledge the land and pay respect to the indigenous nations whose homelands were forcibly taken and inhabited. Please take a moment to read this land acknowledgement, which was created by 3 members of our team, Ella and Keely Driscoll, and our co-director, Mr. Sean Bear. Thank you. Well, I know Chevy has introduced Dr. Tomlin. I just want to say again, looking forward to and really honored to be co-presenting with her today. So I'm going to stop my screen share, and Kathy, do you want to try and pull those slides up? Oh, here they come.
Here they are.
We'll get those into presenter mode, and I think we're going to be set.
Oh, okay, there we go. All right, well, hey, everybody. I see some familiar I just want to make sure I'm not on mute because I have a tendency to do
We can.
that. Okay.
We hear you. I hear
All
you.
right.
I hope everybody else does. But yeah, okay. Casey's giving us a thumbs up, so we're
Okay, thank you.
good.
Usually it's like my name is Kathy. I'm on mute when somebody says, Kathy, you're on mute. Anyway, welcome everybody, and thank you for attending our workshop. As Steve has said, you're going to get like the tip of the iceberg, if you will, in this 3-hour presentation. Typically, what I do when I work within Native communities is I go to the reservation or the program if it's affiliated with an urban center, and spend time with the people there. And because of COVID, we haven't been able to do that as much. It's starting to open up a little bit, so that's kind of nice. However, with that being said, I spend 2.5 days with the tribal leaders and the tribal community and the people providing the services. So what you're going to get today is kind of a synopsis of what that might look like if the center was invited in, and how that would be approached in your community. So I'm acknowledging, Steve and I acknowledge that there are different tribal customs and nuances and concerns. So we won't be able to address all of them, but we encourage you to speak and or put your comments in the chat box as you feel like you want to draw our attention and to help educate us about what's important to you when it comes to this kind of approach. So with that being said, what we can cover is the heart and soul of MI. What are the pieces that are key? We have an exercise called the Taste of MI, which was created by Dr. Miller years ago, and we'll talk to you about that as both an opportunity to practice after demonstration, but also we're going to offer you a handout as a result of coming to the class that you can start practicing just using the format there, and just let us know what you think about that. We'll talk about what motivational interviewing says about how people change, trying it out. And then we have a discussion at the end of our 3 hours about harm reduction and cultural aspects as it relates to what you're learning or what you already know regarding motivational interviewing. So that's ambitious, but we're gonna soldier on through, and hopefully with your input we can also I like to take little paths off the beaten path, which Steve often knows that I do. So it's really important for me that you get your needs met in this time that we spend together as well. So feel free to jump in and let us know. Okay. So let's start with the basic assumptions behind the practice of motivational interviewing. And again, I know some of you have been trained in MI. Maybe some of you could co-train with us. And then some of you're beginners. It's all new information. So that's pretty typical when we go out and train this package. So just be aware that no comment or question is okay. It's okay because somebody else probably has the same experience. So this is really a slide that tells us what are some of the beliefs, basically. What are the underlying assumptions about that MI calls upon? So one of the number one skills in motivational interviewing is your ability, your skill at expressing accurate empathy. So we're going to talk about what accurate empathy in motivational interviewing is. It doesn't mean that you're not empathic, because you probably are. However, in the practice of MI, it's when you're working with somebody else, is your empathy received by the other in a way that they recognize it, in a way that they say, that's it, absolutely. And that's what we're talking about when we talk about empathy and MI. Maintaining congruence between you and the other, meaning that, and this kind of ties into the collaborative spirit of MI, in the sense that when you're working with somebody else, you're seen as two experts meeting together, and that not one or the other dominates the conversation. And in fact, if you're the MI practitioner, you're actually listening more than you are talking in general. So what you're talking about in MI is genuineness, and you're talking about a collaborative spirit, one where your knowledge is honored and their expertise is not necessarily dominates, but is more significant in the sense that you have no decision-making control over the person you're trying to help. Ambivalence, mixed feelings, feeling out of balance, feeling out of sorts is normal. And in my experience in working with people, try to perfect this practice, or just trying to be helpful to people, or feeling stuck basically with somebody who they don't understand why somebody isn't shifting their behavior to benefit themselves. Ambivalence is the issue often, and it's often misunderstood and not acknowledged when we're helping people. So we want to talk about what is ambivalence, what is feeling out of sorts about a decision about, and how can we help. Robocall coming in. Discord, otherwise known as resistance. I prefer the word resistance to discord, because when I'm feeling like pushback from somebody, it feels like more resistance than discord. But essentially, in motivational interviewing, when you're encountering somebody who appears to be resistant, generally it's viewed as a relational problem between you and the other. And so it's a special way of looking at how you can help somebody reduce their resistance. And so MI is actually pretty good at doing that. And finally, the last notion of supporting self-efficacy. Self-efficacy is a term that really refers to the sense that I can do. I have the sense within myself, the fact that I feel able to make a shift in my behavior that would support me as a person. So that's what self-efficacy, and that's a kind of a 50-cent phrase, but basically that's what it means. It's how is my assessment of how able am I to make a shift in my behavior. Now you'll note that I'm using the word shift a lot, because I learned from my native friends at Grand Ron that the word change can be a loaded word for a lot of Native people. So I'm in the process of shifting, using the word shift versus change, because it can trigger some historical trauma. So I don't know how y'all feel about that, but I took their advice and am now trying to make that shift myself. But we're talking about change, whether you like the word change or shift. That's what we're talking about, is behavioral change or shift. And Steve, feel free to add in whenever you feel the spirit move you.
Thank you, Kathy. I was trying to reach out to Chevy or Casey or Lindy. It appears the chat is disabled, and I want to make sure that folks are able to utilize the chat. I like to use the chat too, to get some conversation going. So if we could enable that chat box, I think that would be helpful to the audience. And if you could also co-host Kathy and I, that would be.
Yeah, of course. I did disable the Zoom chat, but I can re-able that. I do know that we do have the chat function on Steven, that attendees can drop the questions and participate as well.
Okay,
I'm
not able to use the chat. It says chat.
Oh yeah, let me go ahead and change that, and I will promote you guys.
Oh, great. The chat is on. So I'm just encouraging the audience to utilize that chat box as well. Because Kathy and I will ask you guys some questions, some to reflect on, and we'll ask for your feedback too. So the chat is a great way to do that.
Yeah,
Aside from
we
our-
often, yeah, we often use the chat box. We're chatty people anyway. I think that's why we like it. Okay. All right. Thanks for that. Thanks, Chevy, for that. All right. So we wanted to spend our first hour. This is so important to me for the practice of MI that we wanted to spend our first hour focusing on this particular aspect of motivational interviewing. And what I will tell you is a lot of training that you go to will talk about this, but they really won't go in depth into it. And in my opinion, especially from a Native American perspective, spirituality and connecting with people in a good way, in an honoring way, in a respectful way is so important to anything that happens within those relationships that I think sometimes the spirit is not addressed in a good way enough. So as a person that comes from a Native family with a Native energy behind that, despite my whiteness, I will tell you that when I first learned of MI, that was the one thing that impressed me the most, was the underlying practice of MI requires the person to be in spirit and style with somebody. So
Yes.
what we're talking about is really a spirit of communication and a spirit of depending on your particular cultural practices, a spirit of engaging culture into any kind of shifting process with somebody and always having that up front and center. So for me, it made the most sense. And so I wanted to spend time talking about it and maybe creating a deeper understanding about it during our first hour. So that's what we're going to do. So what you'll see here is what are the words that are used to describe this, and we're going to go through them, and then we'll finish our first hour together with an exercise that hopefully will draw that out for you personally. So let's see. There you go. So we're going to start with compassion. The spirit of compassion is to have your heart and mind set in the right place so that the trust you gain is deserved. So how does MI do that? So in motivational interviewing, what you're doing is you're actively promoting the welfare of the other in your relationship with them. The priority is to their needs, not yours. So this could happen. It happens a lot when we feel pressured, where we're trying to meet the needs of ourselves, the agencies we work in, our bosses, our families. When you're doing an MI practice, your focus is on the needs of the other, and you're really listening to hear what those are. To offer, and I really like this statement, to offer and practice a deliberate commitment to pursue the welfare and best interests of the other. So when you're doing a practice like MI, you do have to commit to working on you doing it properly, doing it within that spirit and style, and also to avoid self-interest. And I really like that additional piece. So I'm here compassionately to offer my best self to meet your best self in a spirit of collaboration where we can address what's most important to you without trying to convince or persuade or encourage, but just to be present with somebody, to be genuine. So acceptance has 4 different components, I guess. So what does acceptance mean in terms of my attitude, my belief about that? And you'll notice I have little funny things just to keep your interest up on Zoom. I found that movement helps.
I love those transitions, Kathy. I've got to learn how to do that.
Yeah, I get bored listening to myself, so it's nice to have a transition to pay attention. All right, so how do we define acceptance? So what you're going to say is absolute worth. You honor the absolute worth of the human being. You support and try to understand that you are not in a decision-making position with them. You can't make the change or shift for them. You can't decide for them. You can influence, but it's really ultimately it's their choice. Accurate empathy, I spoke to earlier. We'll just define that in our next hour a little bit more thoroughly. And then to affirm strengths and efforts that you notice, attempts at change or shifting behavior, acknowledgement of the struggles, acknowledgement of the resiliency.
Yeah.
So absolute worth. For those of you who have a clinical background, this is Rogerian therapy, humanistic therapy, psychology 101.
Yeah.
The notion of unconditional positive regard where there is no judgment. And this comes in handy when you're dealing with trauma. It comes in handy when you're dealing with stigma. It comes in handy when you're dealing with difficult behavioral issues that need to change to help the person improve their quality of their life. Accurate empathy emphasizes an effort to understand somebody's, so it's not sympathy, it's an empathic response where you really, in a way, I like to call it, I don't know if you've ever had the experience of having the detached empathy. Really what that means is I'm present, I can feel it, but I recognize it's not mine. But I can be with you, I can communicate with you that I understand.
Yeah.
Affirming in Native country is a little bit tricky, but very necessary. Some of the best affirmations actually in my years of training with the center have come from Native practitioners. And it was an acknowledgement that it can trigger trauma with people. So we have to acknowledge genuinely and honestly what you're seeing in terms of the person's progress as they struggle with difficult shifts in their life. And then finally, acknowledging the autonomy that the person has to basically tell you, well, thank you for sharing, but I'm going my own way. And that can be demoralizing sometimes. However, it's, as we mentioned earlier, it's not about us, it's about them, and it's about honoring our relationship with them. And it's also about, we can get into situations where I just had one recently where I really care about this man who is pursuing a graduate degree, and I just see so much potential in him, and I see his strengths, and I see how talented he is. And I was pushing too hard, and I basically had to back off because I realized he wasn't engaged in for a variety of reasons. And so I said, okay, I'm not honoring this person's where he's at, and I have to back off. And I actually apologized to him, and he laughed at me, and I said, why are you laughing at me? This is for real, dude. And he said, I've never had an elder apologize to me. And I said, well, call this a first, because I'm practicing my best MI right now, and I'm realizing that I'm pushing harder for you than you are for yourself right now. So you have your reasons why it's not a good time to pursue X, Y, or Z.
Yeah.
And I want to acknowledge that with you. So he was very grateful, but we had a little chuckle about that. And this sometimes can be hard because you want what the person wants for them, especially if it's healthy and will improve the quality of their life. And yet, even though they want that, sometimes the mini steps to get there, they're just not in a good place to get there in the moment that you're talking with them.
Yeah.
Partnership and collaboration is it's a Native value. So from tribal community to tribal community, that's how things are. And so this should be pretty common for most people. So it's basically, mutual expertise, which we talked about earlier. Evocation is a 50-cent word, but basically the picture is really what this is about. I heard from other Native friends that those who went to a training that Dr. Miller was going to write a 4th edition of MI. I think I'll retire on that one, but I was like, I'm done. There's only so many different ways that you can get this point across. However, he's going to change the word evocation to empowerment is what I heard. And it makes sense to me. So drawing out my ability to draw out the person's own priorities, values, wisdom, explore their own reasons for change. So at the bottom, you'll see darn cat, and that's the preparatory change talk coupled with the high commitment language that you would listen to and you would hear and you would intervene on, respond to in the practice. And this is something we'd go into much further detail in a longer training. So desirability, reasons and needs, and commitment, taking action and taking steps. So that's the darn cat. And then we're at our activity. Right on time too. You want to introduce this or?
Yes, and I would say too.
We won't take 30 minutes, by the way. We don't have that kind of time, but.
Yes, well, and as Kathy and I are reviewing some of this information, I want you to be reflecting on how you may have utilized or are utilizing some of these aspects. One of the things I shared with Kathy yesterday when we were talking was when I was introduced to MI many years ago, I remember looking to a colleague of mine and saying, wow, I'm already doing some of this. And so it was already there, sort of in the nature of how I was working with patients. So some of this is intuitive, will be intuitive, and maybe has been intuitive for many of you. What we want to do now, and this is an activity I think that requires you to reflect a little bit. But I know that when we did this the last time, one of the things that we're going to ask you to do is really to stop and spend a few moments and think about describing a person in your life that showed you the following in your connection or relationship with them. So you're asking yourself some of these questions, and this person can be somebody you're currently connected to or someone from the past. But let's just take a little time to share with each other and whatever you're comfortable sharing. And Kathy, I don't know if we have a little bit smaller group. This is a great number, by the way. We've got about 20 of us, just a perfect group size. Kathy, I wasn't sure if you wanted to just kind of open the floor or give time for our participants to think a little bit about the following questions. And Kathy, please jump in there too if there's some other components to this as we set the group up to think about this.
We have 16 people, or
we've
no,
got
20.
I've got 24 on my list.
Minus the three of us, so that's 21.
Yeah.
Okay. I would say, can we get into 3 groups or 7 groups of 3?
That's great. Let's do.
And then
that's a great idea. Let's do some small breakout rooms.
I'm going to put the questions in the chat box, I think. Yeah. And let me know if this works. So let's see if that works. There you go.
Oh, great. You see, we can learn some of this tech stuff, Kathy.
Right.
We got this.
Are we ready to go into some breakout rooms?
Yeah. And by the way, you don't have to answer all the questions. Pick and choose the ones you feel best about, because and we're going to give it maybe 10 to 12 minutes
Yeah.
roughly.
Yeah, let's
We
have
give you a lot more time in the longer training, but just to give you a flavor.
Okay.
Yeah, so you can share with each other as we go into the breakout rooms, and we'll pull you back out. You'll get a notice before you come back out, and then we'll share whatever you're comfortable with sharing with the group as we come back. See you in a little bit.